So, as we get into the story, where we left off last time, uh, Taru had decided he was going to form these sanitary squads, and we jump right in from there. Taru's turn is a little bit mysterious. We talked about this last time. He considers himself just sort of a hedonist, a person who, lives an everyday average life and has decided to, completely turn around and do something different, do something that involves a high risk to himself. So here are some quotes from the book. It's interesting that Ryu does not want to ascribe some greatness to these decisions. He considers them really sort of just normal decisions that a person makes under such pressures. He says those who enrolled in the sanitary squads had indeed no such great merit in doing as they did, since they knew it was the only thing to do. And the unthinkable thing would have been not to do anything. I might have mentioned the example before, but every now and then you get those feel-good news stories where somebody does something good and they interview the person and say, "What made you blah, blah, blah?" And the person says something along the lines of, "Well, I just did what any person would do." And that's really the position of Ryu. There's nothing heroic about it. On the other hand, there's something probably evil or at least completely amoral to not do anything at all. He considers it logical. So far, so good, but we do not congratulate a schoolmaster on teaching that 2 and 2 make 4, though we may perhaps congratulate him on having chosen his laudable vocation. So here I have a little bit of trouble. Maybe you can help me. Because it seems like Ryu thinks that the teaching of 2 plus 2 is the decision that the sanitary squad people have made. It seems to me that the decision that they made was to become a teacher, to become a schoolmaster. Doesn't it? I mean...
Yeah, I agree. The comparison I find doesn't really fit to compare that's a teacher teaching 2 plus 2 and the sanitary squad.
Yeah. I mean, he adds more to it to say, I think he did that in order to do the next move where he says, historically, people have been killed for saying 2 plus 2 equals 4. You can think of people who, put forward heliocentric models of the solar system were burned alive. So maybe that's what Camus is trying to do here. But yeah, I'm wrestling with it. I'm going to think about it some more. But yeah, it really seems like this is the decision to become a schoolmaster and teach not just 2 plus 2 equals 4, but all kinds of things involved in avoiding the plague. He says, the only matter is whether 2 plus 2 indeed equals 4. And he says it's the same thing as saying the only matter is there a plague? But anyhow. The essential thing was to save the greatest possible number of persons from dying and being doomed to unending separation. Okay. Nothing admirable about this attitude. It was merely logical. I was trying to teach. Are you familiar with the SAT essay? You will be, because you're going to be taking the course.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
It's I'm bringing this up for a reason. It's an analytical task. They give you some source material that's supposed to be persuasive. It's a persuasive text. I'm not
Mhm.
saying that as it's effective. That's up to you, but it's argumentative in nature. And your task is to pick out the techniques um, that the writer or speaker, if it's a speech, the techniques that are used, and comment on them. Judge them. Judge them fairly. Anyhow, uh, a lot of times we start off making certain distinctions for the students, saying, well, you have argumentative techniques that are appealing to people's rationality. And, we talk about things like using experiments and statistics in the argument, using, charts and graphs, stuff like that, using studies and so forth. And then you have things that appeal to the emotions or to aesthetic senses. A person can use beautiful and vivid descriptions of things. So in a text that you will see when you come to class that argues that we should not drill for oil in the Alaskan Wildlife Refuge, uh, Jimmy Carter is the writer, former president, writes beautifully about the animals who live there and so on. I promise this digression will end shortly. So I'm trying to make the distinction between the logical persuasion and sort of emotive persuasion. And one of my students says, well, he makes an appeal to logic by describing all of those beautiful things. And I said, okay, go on. And he says, well, it wouldn't be logical to destroy something so beautiful. And I'm like, look, that's not wrong. It's just, I don't know. It's like in order to be systematic, we're going to kind of try to say that what he's doing there is actually an appeal not to your logic, but to your emotions, to your, let's say, sympathy for animals, appreciation for nature, and things like that. But what you said is kind of like what Ryu is saying. Even though he doesn't say something like life is beautiful. But yeah, he attributes all of his motivation to mere logic that he categorizes or describes as just banal, just everyday, nothing special, which is interesting. Okay. On Monsieur Grand. So Monsieur Grand is Ryu's hero. I also found it funny that okay, so he says Grand is the best. He immediately says yes when he's asked to join the uh, sanitary squads. He doesn't hesitate. That's what this first line is. From this angle, the narrator holds that more than Ryu, so even more than himself, because he hasn't revealed that he's the narrator yet, even more than Ryu or Taru, of course, he's humble. He wouldn't say that he's better. Grand was the true embodiment of the quiet courage that inspired the sanitary groups. He had said yes without a moment's hesitation and with large-heartedness that was second nature to him. Okay. So there's all kinds of things that come right after that where he says, yes, but only 2 hours a day. Like he has all these limitations. And he didn't even volunteer. He was asked. It's kind of strange, isn't it? I don't know.
Yeah, just a moment before he was talking about how volunteering is the logical thing to do, nothing to glorify there, but now he's
Yeah.
glorifying Grant, who basically probably put in the least effort.
Yeah. Yeah. Not to downplay Grant completely, but Taru is a person who jumped into the fire, so to speak. Like Ryu was already in the fire because he's a doctor. But yeah, I mean, I guess he wants to hold up the everyman. Ryu's character, and I think actually Camus himself would try to maintain a certain optimism about regular everyday people's goodness. And I think maybe that's what he's trying to do. But yeah, the first thing he says right after that is, well, I have my other job, and he's got all these limitations. I need to work on my sentence. Oh, you need to work on your sentence? Okay.
Yep. Here's a day off. Work on that sentence.
Yeah. I have a cat to feed, and okay, so he goes on to say, this is what Gran says. Why, that's not difficult. Plague is here, and we've got to make a stand. That's obvious. Ah, I only wish everything were as simple. Then he went back to his phrase. So the real problem for him is getting this darn sentence perfect. Not the plague. The plague is, it's a simple thing. And look, I get it. It is. I mean, I would say it's a good thing if we have people. Maybe, I don't know. I keep trying to put it in context of, okay, this was written after the Second World War. So he's especially close to everything that happened. I mean, of course, he was in the resistance, but I mean, time-wise, not much time had passed. So things are still fresh in his mind, in Camus' mind. By the way, I learned something today digging around. It turns out that the Allies tried to invade Oran and failed the first time.
Really?
Yeah. It was okay. It was basically at that point being controlled, being administered by Vichy France. So that's the French fascists who were collaborating with the Germans. So when the Allies showed up, they thought that the French would pretty much surrender, but Vichy France, and honestly, really France in general, were not particularly interested at the time in giving up any of their colonial holdings. So they decided they're going to defend Oran, and I forget the commander of that invasion's name, but he really thought they were going to be like, okay, and just kind of surrender and give up the port, and then, let the Allies take over. But no, they fought back, and it was one of the worst. It was a complete fiasco. There was like a 90% casualty rate. It was unbelievable. Yeah.
I find that doesn't really fit the people that Camus described in the book.
I know. Well, it's funny because there is all kinds of unreality here. This book takes place in 1940X, right? But the war is not even mentioned. So this is an alternate dimension. And in that alternate dimension, there are also no Arabs in the entire city of Oran. Now, I kind of mentioned that at the beginning in the first session, that it could be him. He has this way of kind of being ironic, like that could be his thing. Or maybe he's just, I don't know. There's this thing about how the Spaniards are really sort of like weird and criminal in the book as well. Maybe out of sympathy for Arab people, he just replaced them with Spaniards. I don't know. It's strange because like the whole underground, the Spanish restaurant that we're going to see here in a little while, that's where you meet the criminals, and everybody he meets, all the criminals are Spaniards, except for the last two, the two guardsmen. Anyway. So, okay, back on track. Yes, it's a fact that people like to have examples given to them, or if it's a fact, men of the type they call heroic. And if it's absolutely necessary that this narrative should include a hero, the narrator commends to his readers with, to his thinking, perfect justice, this insignificant and obscure hero who had to his credit only, a little goodness of heart and a seemingly absurd ideal, that, striving after the perfect sentence. Yeah, he's the hero for Ryu. Okay. at the end of this chapter, we get these couple lines about people showing solidarity in other countries. He listens to the radio before he goes to sleep. And he says, and from the ends of the earth across thousands of miles of land and sea, kindly, well-meaning speakers tried to voice their fellow feeling, and indeed did so, but at the same time proved the utter incapacity of every man truly to share in suffering that he cannot see. So it's, you couldn't imagine sort of thing. Oran, we're with you, they called emotionally. But not, the doctor told himself, to love or die together, and that's the only way. They're too remote. That got me thinking about solidarity with people in our time. People going through incredibly horrifying things in the world. And I don't know, that's really kind of a big side discussion where, I don't know, people,
Well,
it's very easy to go on. Mm-hmm.
no, you say what you had first.
It's easy for people to say, I feel solidarity with X group of people. Sometimes it's done very lightly. And what's the solution? Is the solution to say to yourself, well, I can't understand everything that they're going through. I can just express, or should you sit and try to really put yourself in there? I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. Somehow when something's so far away, when you really think about it, yeah, you feel bad for those people, but it's still not part of your everyday life. It's just when you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the number of deaths, even in Iran, for a lot of people are just numbers, not to mention for people who live somewhere else and don't know those people who died. For them, it's even more just a number.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you think about it, it's repeatedly mentioned that the numbers were not even enough to to work on the people right there. So yeah.
Not to mention someone living across the world, like, oh
right.
Yeah, there's that city and a couple of people died there. It's like X number of people died.
Yeah, yeah. And then there are some people who take solidarity extremely seriously. Have you heard of John Brown?
Yeah.
So that's a guy who really took things seriously. He felt extreme solidarity with slaves, so much so that he took up a militant struggle that resulted in ending his life eventually. So yeah, he was like, slavery is the thing that I'm going to devote my life to ending. So that's like the solidarity. He put himself in it. He jumped into the fire. So yeah, and there's this recurring thing of how people, they kind of retreat in a way. They don't face reality, even if, numbers are not. The only thing really to get them to face reality is to be constantly exposed to horrible things, which begins happening, unfortunately. So Raymond. So Raymond Rambert, our journalist, has run out of legal options to get out of the city, and has decided to turn to the underworld to find a way out. So Rambert fought to prevent the plague from besting him. Once assured there was no way of getting out of the town by lawful methods, he decided, as he told Ryu, to have recourse to others. I'm also a little bit thoughtful about Ryu just being like, well, keep me posted. Is it Ryu? Shouldn't Ryu be concerned of the plague getting out?
It's none of my business. I'll just, you're sort of a person I know, so tell me how it goes.
Yeah. Yeah, but it would be a really big deal if the plague got out.
It's somehow you'd expect him to maybe try to keep him from leaving. Like this, in the book, he's just, well, okay.
Yeah, it happens a lot, too, for Ryu. He gets this... He's very... he yields a lot, let's say. He gives way. The first time he met Raymond's like, look, I need to get out. And Ryu is always very understanding and like, hey, maybe you're right. I don't know. As far as I know, I have people to treat. That's always his attitude, you know. It happens again towards the end of this thing with Raymond where they have the argument that we'll discuss later about, you know, I'm doing this for love. And Ryu's like, yeah, okay, sure. You know, maybe you're probably right, is what Ryu says. He's like, I don't know. So yeah, Raymond looks for Cotard. Cotard, who is blossoming now as a human being, who's become involved with smugglers. So he's fine with everything, of course. Let's put it like this, he says. I've been feeling much more at ease since the plague settled in. He's a really interesting character. Do you know the movie called Melancholia? Lars von Trier directed it.
No, I don't think I've seen that.
No. I mean, it's okay. It's a Lars von Trier movie, so it's kind of, it's not in the mainstream. Let's just say that. But basically the overarching plot is there's a stray planet that's going to crash into Earth, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. So it's like everybody has to kind of just accept their fate. And it really creates a different feeling for a movie, knowing that there will be zero survivors. And it kind of made me think about how it would be if you knew that everybody was going to, you know, suffer the same fate as you. They had basically a collective fate that they could see approaching in the sky. It gets a little bit closer every day. It's this huge dramatic scene. There's a planet heading for our planet. I was reminded of that movie. I wanted to watch it again before this session, but I didn't have time because I don't remember all the details anymore. But that part I remember. That's kind of the main thing. But yeah, this collective fate thing. Cotard is kind of like that. You know, he realizes everybody's now in my boat because this is where he lives in a way. You know, he's always been in a state of realization that his future could be snatched at him from any moment. But before it was by the police, which for him is worse. Later on, he says, that's going to jail, that's a beginning. But dying to the plague, that's an end. Okay. Anyway, I'm skipping ahead. So Raymond proceeds to meet with a series of criminals. Like I said, 3 Spaniards and 2 French guards. Garcia, Raul, Gonzalez, Marcel, and Louis. I was convinced when I first read this that he was going to just, you know, anger them by constantly pestering them. His progress is frustrated by no-shows, and I meant to add on to that long planning periods. They're always saying, okay, come back tomorrow, come back next week at this time.
Yeah, he keeps going in circles. So he finally gets up to say, first he meets one person, then they sentence another person, but then he somehow ends up not being able to meet with that person. He has to go all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah.
And he doesn't just have a way to contact, say, one of them, and no, he has to go back from the beginning in circles.
Yep. No, that's it. And then when he meets again with Raul is the one he makes friends with, I think, the one that he talks about football with.
Yes.
And he's like, yeah, it's the silliest thing. You really should have, you know, established a contact method for these guys. And he's always just running around, hanging out in bars, trying to spot them. So it bears mentioning that this, again, is a Sisyphean task. It's a ridiculous, absurd, circular, repeated action. Do you know about the myth of Sisyphus? It's one of Camus' essays. I guess it's kind of a short book.
I know the myth. Yeah.
It's the title of the book, though. I mean, it's kind of dark. It's like, okay, if you're a person who doesn't believe that there's something aside from existence, so if you're an existentialist, Camus said, well, then the only real question is, why not end your life right now? And he wrote a whole essay about it, The Myth of Sisyphus, and it's why you should not commit suicide, which is a very dark topic. And it, of course, drew a lot of jeers from people saying like, wow, this guy can't even figure out whether he should stay alive or not. But to summarize the conclusion of that piece of work, it's something like Sisyphus is ultimately someone who has to be judged to be happy, because he just kind of finds his way rolling the rock up the mountain and letting it roll back down. He like learns every crevice of the rock and he gets into it and he becomes, it disappears for him, right? Remember, it's the consciousness of the thing that makes it absurd, but he loses that. He just gets into doing what he does, doing what is necessary. Okay. So yeah, these meetings keep getting botched. Nobody will show up, or he has to wait a week. When they're hanging out in a bar, I wanted to grab this little bit because we see more and more of these. There's a naval officer talking to someone. He says, they had camps, you know, for the natives, with tents for the sick ones and a ring of sentries all around. If a member of the family came along and tried to smuggle in one of those damn fool native remedies, they fired at sight. A bit tough, I grant you, but it was the only thing to do. What do you think's happening there?
Yeah, that was kind of, yeah, I don't know.
What does that sound like? I mean, think about Camus and what just happened to Camus.
No, I mean, it's really like they're just segregating the natives and yeah, I don't know.
So, but what I'm getting at is concentration camps.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess that's sort of alluding to the Second World War Nazi motives.
Yeah, these themes keep coming through. We're going to get a lot more of them later. And if you think about it, like, I'm sure you've done a good bit of World War II study in high school.
Actually, not yet.
Not yet? Okay.
My second year, so.
Okay. Well, you'll hear a lot of times that people said that the concentration camps were kind of a rumor for a time. Like, nobody knew for sure that they existed. Other people say that a lot of people knew about them, but were kind of in denial about them, or had heard about the terrible things that were happening and really couldn't believe it because it was too terrible. So this is like that. This is like somebody, let's say that they're in occupied France and the stories about the camps are starting to circulate. And that's this, you know, this is somebody who's, it's just bringing home even more that this is an allegory for the Nazis. Okay. Theroux says to Cottard, why don't you join us? Join us meaning join the sanitation squads. Cottard gets offended, hops out of his chair. He starts making excuses immediately. It's not my job. Then with an air of bravado, you know, I don't mind it. Not like you guys trying to stop the plague. He suits me well. Why should I bother? So again, he's this character who has found himself flourishing. Immediately after that, I didn't put the line in. Immediately after that, Theroux is like, that's right. This is preventing you from getting arrested. And he's immediately hops up again and he's all, no. Who told you that? And Theroux says, you told me that. Like, don't you remember? So Cottard's a bit of a wreck deep down. He talks about the possibility of going to prison and this crime that goes unmentioned. It was all a mistake. Everybody makes mistakes. And I can't bear the idea of being pulled in for that, of being torn, it says Tom, torn from my home and habits and everyone I know. Okay. Think about that, though, because he could be torn from his home and his habits and everyone he knows by the plague. The thing he doesn't want is to go to jail. And by the way, he wasn't really a sociable person before.
Yeah,
So
he actually changed his habits already just
yeah,
to avoid prison.
yeah, he changed his habits, and so now he likes his habits. He doesn't want to lose the new habits, um, I guess, because yeah, he changed his lifestyle completely. Um, so yeah, he refuses to help. He has all kinds of excuses and rationalizations, including it won't work. Uh, it won't work anyhow. He's shouting at the end. He obviously knows deep down that he should be doing something. Um, so Ryu and Taru visit Raymond. Raymond at this point is just kind of despondent over, these meetings with criminals not working out. Imagine that. Uh, he says, "So you haven't understood yet." Understood what? The plague. Ah, Ryu exclaimed. No, you haven't understood that it means exactly the same thing over and over again. Now, this ties almost immediately to the record. This is at Raymond's hotel room. They come to visit him. He puts on a record. This is literally the 2 paragraphs after that one. Rather a boring record, Rambert remarked. And this must be the 10th time I've put it on today. Are you really so fond of it? No, but it's the only one that I have. And then he adds, that's what I said. It was the same thing over and over again. So the record here is getting the exact same description as what the plague is. The same thing over and over again. Um, have you heard, and okay, do you know much about Nietzsche?
Yeah, sort of.
Do you know about his idea of the eternal recurrence?
Kind of. I watched a while ago a couple documentaries. Kind
Okay.
of forgot about it a bit though.
So I can't help but think that this is a reference to the eternal recurrence. The eternal recurrence is this idea that Nietzsche said hit him like a ton of bricks. He felt the heaviness of it. And it was kind of like based on the idea that there is a limited amount of matter in the universe, but an infinite amount of time. Because of that fact, all matter will combine over and over again infinitely and will combine in every possible way forever, uh, including the life that you're living now, right? So you are a certain combination of materials and circumstances that will eventually recur because there's an infinite amount of time and a limited amount of stuff in the universe. So it hit him. That means you're going to live this life again and again and again, and a bunch of others, apparently. So the question becomes, if somebody were to propose to you that you are going to live your life over and over again, what would your reaction to that be? Hopefully, it wouldn't be one in which you said, oh man, really? Hopefully, it would be one in which you said, okay, great, excellent. And that's, I can't help but think that this it refers to that. The boring record over and over again. Well, why not put on something else? Put on something that you would rather listen to over and over again. But I guess a record, no matter what, would eventually become boring. But the thing about living the same life again and again is that you would not remember the previous time. So, um, so yeah. He reveals that he fought the fascists in Spain. So in the Spanish Revolution, on the side of the anti-fascists. He knows something about courage. So I guess that's the point here, that Camus wants us to know that he's not a coward. And look, when I first read him, I really felt like he was doing something wrong, shirking his duty. But over time, I've come to really kind of think it through. And if you have, and I'm sure you do, people in your life that are, central to your life, being separated from them is a very big and painful, thing. I have more sympathy for him than I used to. I'll just say that. Yeah, and Camus wants us to know it's not that he's afraid. It's that he can't bear to be away from his wife. He says to Ryu, "You're capable of dying for an idea. One can see that right away." The idea he's referring to is heroism, apparently. Well, personally, I've seen enough of people who die for an idea. I don't believe in heroism. I know it's easy, and I've learned it can be murderous. What interests me is living and dying for what one loves. Ryu watches him and says, "Man isn't an idea." This really gets Rambert's goat. He jumps off the bed. Man is an idea, and a precious small idea, once he turns his back on love. My thought is that Ryu should probably respond here by saying, well, he won't even be that if he dies of the plague. He won't even be an idea. So, yeah. And look, his idea here is pretty much borne out later on when things get worse. And we'll talk about that then, but where people, they get worn down, they're emotionally dying, and it even threatens their sense of friendship and everything. That they lose all concept of things like love and friendship, and they become like the living dead. Okay, so that sounds familiar. Ryu says, "I must tell you, there's no question of heroism here. It's a matter of common decency." See, again, for him, it's nothing. It's an idea that might make some people smile, but the only means of fighting a plague is common decency. The next morning, Raymond says, "Okay, fine, I'll help." He had the night to think that over. There's one other thing that I didn't put here. That Raymond says, "You don't know what it's like to be separated from someone you love like I do." In so many words. I'm not getting the exact quote. And Ryu's like, "Okay, whatever. It's just, I gotta go. I have things to do." And Teru lingers for a second and says, "You didn't know about his wife who's in the sanatorium?" And that's the scene right before it says, then Raymond shows up the next morning and says, "Okay, I'll help." He says, "I'll help, but I'm also going to still work on getting out." So that's where things start getting really bad. The peak of the summer. And you can't help as you read but think that Camus wants us to see this really as a hell, where there are even fires eventually. Now people have really and truly come to collective destiny. So again, that film Melancholia. Everybody's tied up in the same situation. There's no way out of it. Made of plague and the emotions shared by all. Strongest of these emotions was the sense of exile and deprivation, with all the cross currents of revolt and fear set up by these. It gets windy, and here, so in addition to the normal use of the weather as a kind of, I say bellwether, that's too much. Something that affects people, affects the story. It gives us some mood. But here it gets directly tied to the plague, where some people believe that the wind is carrying the infection. It says, so a high wind rose and blew for several days through the city. Apparently it's particularly bad in Oran because it's on a plateau. So there's nothing to block the wind. Residents accuse the wind of carrying infection, broadcasting germs, as the hotel manager put it. So here it's not just the weather anymore. The weather is infected. Literally the wind has the plague tied up in it. Okay, the plague reaches the inner districts of the city. they tie off, or they cordon off the worst parts of the city. And you get this thing where people are looking at their neighbors in a better situation and getting jealous, getting envious. Dwellers in these districts could not help regarding these regulations as a sort of taboo, specifically directed or especially directed at themselves, and thus came to envy residents in other areas their freedom. And the latter, the people in the other areas, began to cheer themselves up, saying, well, at least they're not one of those guys. So this is a good illustration of how it wears down the person emotionally. It turns them against each other. It isolates them, which is why solidarity is really important. It needs to be maintained. But as things get worse and worse, it gets harder and harder to maintain solidarity. Some people light their own houses on fire. Like I said, it seems like he really wants us to see this as a hell. So people come back after being in quarantine and they're like, you know what? I had spiders also. Just burn the whole place down. Even though the local authorities are sympathetic, they have to punish these arsonists. So, you know, it becomes a thing. There's more that I didn't put here. People begin looting. Sometimes there are more attempts to get out of the gates, so more people get shot trying to escape. And it's also, it kind of happens unthinkingly. The way it's described by Camus is, and someone's watching their house burn and another guy just decides to run into the house and start taking things, and other people see him do it and they start doing it too. So there's a kind of domino effect. The prisons, so the prisoners and the prison guards are affected more than other people. Now this is also happening in US prisons. It's really bad what's happening there. It's a sticky subject, you know. People can't get past their punitive urges enough to say that we're not convicting all these people to die horribly in prison. But in any case, there's a discussion in the novel of the leveling effect of the plague. So the prisoners and the prison guards, they represent a kind of community. But the plague affects the prison guards as much as the prisoners. So it's like the plague doesn't respect authority. This is a big problem for them. Yeah, it says the plague was no respecter of persons under its despotic rule. Everyone, from the warden to the humblest delinquent, was under sentence, and perhaps for the first time, impartial justice reigned in the prison. So apparently it's normally not fair there at all. The plague is comparatively just. That it's just saying that, yeah, everybody's the same to the plague. There's a small side story about how they didn't like the leveling effect where prisoners and guards were on the same level. So they needed to do something to maintain the hierarchy. And what they do is they decide to give military honors to guards who were affected and I guess died of the plague. So they get military honors. That has the effect of angering the military, who say, no, you're not giving some guards who died of the plague military honors. That will not stand. And so they have to stop doing that, but they've already done it for some people. So future guards are angry because from now on, they're just getting this medal they made up. It's called a plague medal. Not a military honor, which is much more prestigious. They're getting some plague medal. And they can't go and take the military honors back from the guards who already got them. So the military is angry, the other guards are angry. It has just bad effects all around. Everybody involved is not happy. And it's funny because the whole reason they had to do that was to maintain the hierarchy. So whatever the cost. Okay. The plague destroys communities by either killing its members, I should say killing their members, not its members, the community's members, or forcing them into isolation. So all together are discussed prisoners, monks, and military in the short span of pages. So they take the monks from monasteries. Again, the monks would represent a community. Well, we've got someone joining us. Hello, Strahinia. We're kind of a good way through. You're welcome, though. Yeah, the monks also represent a community. So they get evacuated from their monasteries and lodged with religious-minded families. Okay. In the same way, whenever possible, small bodies of men had been moved out of barracks and billeted in schools or public buildings. So yeah, their communities get broken up, basically. Funerals become faster and less personal, and it gets worse and worse. They lose a bunch of formalities for the funerals. No sooner had the priest begun to sprinkle holy water than the first sod, so that's, earth for burial, the first sod rebounded from the lid. The ambulance had already left and was being sprayed with disinfectant, and while spadefuls of clay thudded more and more dully on the rising layer of earth, the family were bundling into a taxi. A quarter of an hour later, they were back home. So the families show up, they do a hurried funeral, and get immediately moved on. That gets even worse. It turns into mass graves. First, it turns into reusing coffins, then encroaching on other land for burial sites, and eventually they have to switch to just using mass graves. People still settle into that. So this is where people start to become completely worn down, emotionally dead. It says they're kept occupied by just the things you have to do to get through the day, including fill out paperwork for these funerals. So even some bureaucracies are still functioning. A municipal employee says, hey, you know what we can do? You know those streetcars that we're not using? We can repurpose those to transport the bodies to the crematorium. And they say, oh, this is great, good idea. So they basically get the trams moving again and turn them into a corpse transportation system. So, I mean, you can't help but notice that this is, again, imagery that would come out of the Second World War. Trains full of the dead. I'm getting a chat here. One sec. Yeah, yeah. Typical for Camus. He never forgets bureaucracy. Yes, yes. There's that point he made about the bureaucracy continuing to function like the living dead during all of this. When Raymond is still trying legal means to get out, he wonders at the fact that they're still functioning, still generating papers and forms. Okay. So yeah, during the late summer and throughout the autumn, there could be seen moving along the roads, skirting the cliffs above the sea, a strange procession of passengerless streetcars swaying against the skyline. It says people pop in to throw flowers into the trains as they pass by. So yeah, things have gotten very bad. So yeah, I found I didn't want to, pick a picture that required a content warning because there are some very, very terrifying pictures of the dead being transported. Uh, this is not the dead being transported, but it is one of the camp trains. Yeah. So earlier we had the situation in which imagination is what was needed. But now imagination is failing. And then memory is failing. People are being completely stripped of their inner workings. Camus mentions that people start sort of speaking in stock phrases. That's also what he said about people sending telegrams out. You know what I mean by stock phrases? Cliches. Phrases anybody can recognize. I don't think I put the quote here, but people are just dealing with the plague, kind of numb to it, and really running out of all energy and force. And they say things like, "This must end." Well, of course, nobody would argue that it shouldn't end.
Except for maybe Cottard.
Yeah, except for Cottard. Cottard is fine. He's like, "Whoa, what are you talking about? This is great." Cottard is he's a ghoul. So this is about parted lovers. They could clearly recall the face, the smile and voice of the beloved, and this or that occasion when, as they saw in retrospect, they had been supremely happy. It's one of those things. They didn't realize how happy they were at the time. So, gather ye rosebuds while ye may. They had trouble picturing what he or she might be doing at the moment when they conjured up these memories. In short, at these moments, memory played its part, but their imagination didn't work. They could remember the person, but they couldn't imagine the person in any particular situation. During the second phase of the plague, their memory failed them too. Not that they had forgotten the face, but what came to the same thing, it had lost fleshly substance, and they no longer saw it in memory's mirror. So really, their inner lives are being stripped out of them. None of us was capable any longer of an exalted emotion. All had trite, monotonous feelings. It's high time it stopped. Yes, that's the sort of, let's say, stock phrase people would say, because in time of calamity, the obvious thing is to desire its end. And in fact, they wanted it to end, of course. It almost goes without saying. That's the thing. Well, what do you mean almost? No, it goes without saying. So it's kind of strange. Not strange, but like you're seeing terrible things happen and you say, that is bad. There's nothing going on there. People are sort of robotic. They're just a series of reactions. This brought to mind the writer Hannah Arendt. She wrote The Origins of Totalitarianism. Her take was that the death camps were a kind of laboratory for total domination of human beings. That the Nazis wanted to reduce the people inside the camps to nothing but a set of reactions interchangeable with each other and nothing else. We remove all human characteristics from them. I was reminded of that reading this. For the first time, exiles, actually, I think when we have, at the end of these sessions, we're going to have an extra session to talk about other things. I might dig up something from Hannah Arendt to talk about. For the first time, exiles from those that they loved had no reluctance to talk freely about them. So, including Ryu, like he normally doesn't talk about his wife. He keeps that all to himself, but now he finds himself opening up Everybody has the same thing going on, truly now. Had no reluctance to talk freely about them, using the same words as everyone else, regarding their deprivation from the same angle as that from which they viewed the latest statistics of the epidemic. So even their own experience is like a set of statistics now. For there's no denying that the plague had gradually killed off in all of us the faculty, not only of love only, not of love only, but even friendship. Naturally enough, since love asks something of the future, nothing was left us but a series of present moments. Yeah. Earlier in the story, there's a talk about how people began just wallowing in their memories and, just living these regrets, sometimes good memories, but then immediately turn to stinging memories because, well, that just brings out the regret all the more. And then they might turn to think about the future for a moment, but that also immediately wounds them because they are constantly reminded that the future is not promised them. Now they don't even bother thinking of the future. They've gotten totally accustomed. What impression, it may be asked, did these exiles of the plague make on the observer? The answer is simple. They made none. To put it differently, they looked like everybody else, nondescript. Their individuality is being destroyed. They are truly just a set of reactions. So, as we come to chapter 19, we see that all feelings are dampened by the plague. Everyone is exhausted, except for Cotard, yes. Taru begins journaling on Cotard even more. Remember, Taru, he says his code of ethics is comprehension. So Cotard, for him, is really interesting because Cotard is he almost doesn't make sense. Vina and I were talking about this earlier. That Cotard is, he's flourishing now. He says about prison that he couldn't imagine having all of his habits torn away from him and all of his people he cares about. But now that's exactly what he lives in. But he's like, no, the prison, that's a beginning. The dying of the plague, that's an end. And that's the difference for him. He'd rather die than go to jail. I guess it's maybe simpler than I think it is. He's simply, you'll never take me alive, coppers. That's his whole attitude. So yeah, the thing he'd detest most is being cut off from others. He'd rather be one of a beleaguered, so, under siege, under pressure, beleaguered crowd than a prisoner alone. So he feels a real camaraderie in all of this. Where most people are being worn down and stripped of their sense of friendship, he feels a real connection with everyone. Because, so it's open to speculation. It's like this is where he normally lives as a wanted man, and now everybody's in his world. This is where he's always been. The plague has put an effective stop to police inquiries, sleuthings, warrants of arrest, and so forth. From Taru's diary, when I suggested to him the surest way of not being cut off from others was having a clean conscience, he frowned. So, Cotard is one of these guys who's like, everyone's guilty. Now that's definitely a theme throughout this, right? Collective guilt. So he frowns and says, if that's so, everyone's always cut off from everyone else. And a moment later, he adds, say what you like, Taru, but let me tell you this. The one way of making people hang together is give them a spell of plague. So this is all good news for him. And look, as a non-criminal person, I kind of like see that it seems like important changes in the world might not happen unless really bad things happen, and that terrifies me. you know, it might have to happen that the water level rises 5 meters for people to really get, you know, in the right headspace about doing something about the environment, for example. So he's not entirely wrong that, you know, these things can get people to do the right thing. I included this quote here because it's hilarious. As they're walking through the street and they see people kissing, Cotard, he's such a creep. He's like, yeah, woo. It's like people are people are being lovers in the street, right? And he's cheering them on. Like, what a creep. Good work, my dears. Go to it. I just found that really funny.
Yeah.
Because people have to be like, get away from us, please. But since he personally has learned what it is to live in a state of constant fear, he finds it normal that others should come to know this state. Or perhaps it should be like this. Fear seems to him more bearable under these conditions than it was when he had to bear its burden alone. In this respect, he's wrong. Again, this is from Tarrou's diary. So this is why Tarrou's so stuck on him, because he doesn't seem to make sense. And indeed, he doesn't, like, if you think about it for a bit. In this respect, he's wrong. There's definitely something wrong with that man. Aside from the fact that he's a criminal. Like, there's just something is... Okay, I won't be too judgy. Something is disconnected in there. This makes him harder to understand than other people. Still, after all, that's why he's worth a greater effort to understand. So he's going to put in the effort and try to get through to understand Cotard. So closing out this chapter, they go to see Orpheus, the Greek play. By the way, it's worth mentioning that that play involves the main character, Orpheus, traveling into the underworld to get his deceased wife. So that looks like it's probably a reference to maybe to Ryu, whose wife is out in the sanatorium. But yeah, there is a group, an opera group that was trapped in town when the plague began, and in order to secure their lodgings, they made a deal with the theater, and the theater says, you perform once a week, you know, keep people's spirits going. And so that's what they do. Tarrou and Cotard go out for a night at the opera. As the play goes on, only a few people notice that in his song of the second act, Orpheus introduced some tremolos, so that's the wavering of the voice, not in the score. So he's going, oh, and voiced an almost exaggerated emotion when begging the Lord of the Underworld to be moved by his tears. You could kind of see this coming. I think as you're reading it, you're like, oh, wow, okay. As though the singer had been waiting for this cue, more likely because the faint sounds that came to him from the orchestra seats confirmed what he was feeling, he chose this moment to stagger grotesquely to the footlights, his arms and legs splayed out under his antique robe, and fall down in the middle of the property sheepfold. By the way, I take that to mean he stumbled outside into the sheep pen, but I'm not sure. I don't think there's a part of the theater called the sheepfold. I'll look it up later. Always out of place, but now, in the eyes of the spectators, significantly, appallingly so. So, yeah, the chapter finishes off with everyone fleeing the theater as one of the actors dies during a performance. And it's kind of a microcosm of what was happening in a lot of respects. People are there trying to retreat, trying to behave normally, trying to live as if they still have a choice. And the Mask of Red Death shows up right there. Do you know that story? I'm going to probably
include... I read it actually pretty
great.
recently.
See? These are people trying to avoid the plague, I'm actually probably going to assign that as part of this group at some point. It's only like 5 pages long. But no, you can't. The Mask of Red Death, the uninvited guest shows up at the theater, shows up at the party to remind you that you cannot escape. Everyone flees. Cotard and Taru just stand up and watch. So they're already very well worn into this. Well, okay, Cotard is just happy. Taru has been working on the sanitary squads for long enough that he's been worn down. So they just watch. So that's it actually for now. That's as far as we've gone for this one. Next time, get through to chapter 25. By the way, did you notice that part 3 is only 1 chapter? And it's
Yeah, it was really short.
Yeah. And Ryu, the narrator, does this thing where he says, look, I'm just going to describe to you a few things about this. And it seems almost like, again, saying, I'm not going to be able to communicate to you how terrible it is. So let me just tell you about how certain people were affected. And he talks about the prisons. He talks about what else? Oh yeah, the nuns and monks. He talks about the funerals and how they changed, eventually turning into mass graves. He always wants to give us as much of a journalistic account as possible. He's like, I'm not going to even attempt to communicate the depth of horror that this all represents. So yeah, chapter 3, the peak of the heat and the worsening of the plague to an extreme degree. Only 1 chapter. That's it. So yes, next time we're going through chapter 25. Look in the study guide to see exactly which one that is. I believe it's the second to the last chapter of chapter 4, of part 4. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Is there anything you want to talk about?
No, not really.
Okay. Well, in that case, until next time, stay safe out there.
You too. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.